We learned clearly in Surah Al-Ra'd, verse 11, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change that which is in themselves. So this is one of our clues, one of the key clue about change. The key hadith in this area that we want to reflect on. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْعَثْ لِهَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ عَلَى رَأْسِ كُلِّ مِئَةٍ سَنَةٍ مَن يُجَدِّدْ لَهَا دِينَهَا. So verily Allah will raise up for this ummah at the head of every century, or you could say as 100 years, someone who will rejuvenate for them their religion. This is an authenticated hadith. It's in the Mishkat al-Masabih, but it has roots. Even scholars like Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani, who is considered one of the great muhaddith last century, authenticated this hadith. Okay, so at the head of every 100 years, and another hadith that said qarn, which could be also not just a century, a generation. Okay, at the head of this period of time, somebody would rejuvenate the religion. Okay, tajdeed, yujaddid, it's tajdeed. Okay, so tajdeed literally means renewal, rejuvenation, okay, restoration, to restore to how it was prior to the change. See, this is the key point. Another word which is used by scholars is ihya. And ihya is also a revival, put life into something. You're putting back life. So restoring the status quo without necessarily any attempt to improve or to reform it. This is ihya. So you are bringing life, bring it back to its source. But another word sometimes that comes into this is islah. Okay, so that's another word, islah. Now, islah literally can mean, if you look it up in dictionaries, it will say reform. Okay, and even the negative reform that we're talking about, they could use in Arabic islah, but it also means to repair something. But the clearest word for us, which is in the authentic hadith, is tajdeed. So that is the clearest one for us in terms of dealing with the arguments. Now, in terms of the scholarly definitions of tajdeed, and we'll look at from the early generation, middle generation, and new scholars, Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, who died in 724 of the Common Era, 124 years after the Hijrah. So he said that tajdeed is ihya, right? So he said it is a revival of that which has disappeared or died out due to neglect of the Quran and the Sunnah and their requirements. So requirements is a big word now. What is required from the Quran and Sunnah is big, right? So it's been neglected or it disappeared. So you put life back into it. So Zuhri said that tajdeed is ihya. You see, putting life back into that which was needed. Imam as-Suyuti, rahimahullah, Jalaluddin as-Suyuti, this is a great scholar. And many put him in the list of the Mujaddids. They put Suyuti for his century, because that would have been the 10th century after the Hijrah. He died in 911. It's 1505 of the Common Era. And he said, tajdeed in religion means renewal of its guidance, explanation of its truth, as well as eradication of evil innovation, bid'ah, right? And of extremism or laxity in religion. So you see, so he's getting deep now. He's saying it's going to be renewed, your guidance will come, right? You explain the truth and you eradicate bid'ah. So he's action-oriented, right? The movement people like this, because he's action-oriented. So he's saying eradicate the evil innovations. Also, get rid of extremism. You got to be balanced now. And this is important for us today when we look at the Muslim world, because extremism is one of the problems we face, and also laxity in religion. Lazy Muslims, right? They're Muslims sometime, Muslim not another time. You know, they're lazy in their deen. So he also said tajdeed also means observance of people's benefits, right? Societal traditions, and the norms of civilization and Sharia. So he said that's part of he's giving a broad definition, right? So you got to deal with the benefits, the people's traditions, right? And you got to deal with civilization, man. What's happening in civilization. Now, a contemporary scholar, that is Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, has written a lot about this as well, and some of his shorter statements, which are right to the point and clear. He said, combining the beneficial old with the appropriate new. Al-Qadim al-Nafi' wal-Jadid al-Salih. Right? So the beneficial old with the appropriate new. So he said appropriate, right? So he condensed a lot of thoughts in a few words. Then he said being open to the outside world without melting into it. Okay, so you're open to the world, you're open to the West, but you don't get lost in the West. Okay? To rejuvenate the religion by the religion itself. So you use the deen to rejuvenate the deen, instead of using Marxism or Freud, or feminism or socialism to rejuvenate. And that's the fault that many people fell into. And when you have Islamic socialists and they took over the country, they may be bringing back justice for the poor, but the problem is Marxism and socialism has baggage to it. You say you're a socialist, you got a socialist theory on your back. And in that theory is godlessness. Most socialists do not believe in God. If you're a feminist, many Muslim women wanted change, rightfully so, especially in the 20th century, when Muslim countries had stagnated and women lost their rights, so they wanted change. But the problem was they saw the feminist movement in the West fighting for change. And they said, let's become Muslim feminists. Now, you want rights for women, but when you say you're a feminist, you got baggage on your back. Because in feminist theory, they focus more on the individual rights than the family. And some feminists go as far as not even caring about men. They don't want a man at all. They're at war with men. They even believe they come from different planets, different mentalities completely. And that's a problem for a Muslim. So what the Sheikh is saying is, use the religion. You can find within the deen, if you study it, you will find something that you can rejuvenate. But the problem is people don't study into the deen itself to be able to rejuvenate it properly with the deen. Now, to go further now than we were, we want to look at the qualities of the Mujadid. Okay? Because remember now, it says, Inna Allaha yab'athu lihadhihi al-umma ala ra'si kulli miyat sana men yujaddid laha dinaha. Men, who? Now, every 100 years, now the word men can mean an individual, it could also mean a group, or it can mean a movement. So the Mujaddid does not necessarily have to be an individual. It could be a group of people working simultaneous together. It could be a movement, what we call an Islamic movement. So there's a certain ideology or approach to Islam taken up by people, and they're part of this tajdeed type of movement. Scholars also showed that you could have more than one Mujaddid in different parts of the world simultaneously. Because the Muslim world is so vast that what happens in the Indo-Pakistani subcontinent may be very much different than what happened in North Africa or West Africa. It's way different culture, although it's Islam, right? So you could have a Mujaddid reviving in West Africa and a Mujaddid reviving in India. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be one person that everybody simultaneously in the Muslim world is following. Okay, so these are different concepts, but now giving you the basis of a lot of discussion on this. What are some of the qualities of a Mujaddid? Okay, because somebody might say, this person's a Mujaddid. You'll hear this being said. What are some of the qualities? Number one, that person should be an excellent Muslim, fully practicing in thought and in attitude. Okay? Two, they should have a thorough and comprehensive grasp of Islam. It's a comprehensive one. So they're not in a narrow madhab. They have to study other schools of thought. They have to have a comprehensive look. If you're talking about tajdeed now, then you'll see that the people who qualify with this, they study other scholars, not just one madhab, but they go outside of it. Okay? Next, the ability to distinguish Islam from un-Islam, okay, or what is other than Islam. In the finest details, they can distinguish it. Because if you're going to renew, if you're going to take us back, we're in a contemporary period now, and you want to go back to the original. You have to distinguish those issues that are not Islamic. You have to know how to do this, right? It's not everybody can be a Mujadid. A person could be a great scholar, but they would not be a Mujadid. Okay? Also, the ability to extract the truth from long established falsehoods. This is deep. Because, and I found this out practically in our community, that most Muslims base their religion on their culture. So it's what my people used to do in my village, or in my city, or we in this part of the world. And sometimes there's falsehoods, things that are wrong that they do, and they just do it. Like I remember in Cape Town, I had a lot of experiences in Cape Town actually, and I remember that the Cape Townians are originally Malay, from Indonesia, Malaysia, and whatever. And they had this thing that they used to do in the spring, cutting the rumpies, they call it. Cutting rumpies. So what they would do is when the spring season came, they would cut from grapefruits and other plants, and the leaves had a nice smell, and then they'd make it into a nice bouquet and the man would wear it to the mosque. So everybody has this. The sisters cut the rumpies, and the man would bring it and he would wear it on this special day to the masjid. An Indonesian scholar came to Cape Town, and he said, this is a Buddhist tradition. This is Buddhism that we used to practice in Indonesia, right? But the Muslims were so far away from Indonesia, they didn't know the difference, right? So they did it because the people who follow seasons for their religion, right? And so he brought that there, and when he did that, some people get angry, right? And they say, like, my mother used to do that. And he said, well, this is what he said. Are you saying my mother is wrong? So he's going to fight you, right? You don't say anything about his mother, right? And so this part gets the Mujadid in a little bit of trouble, okay? But it's part of the requirement. So the Mujadid needs a clear mind, penetrating vision, right? Unbiased, straight thinking. He's not biased. He doesn't care about those Pakistanis or those Arabs or those Turks. No bias, right? Clear, straight thinking. The ability to see the right path, clear of all extremes, and he keeps balance. So he stays on the straight path in his thinking, and he's balanced, right? It's very important for a Mujadid. The ability to think independently of contemporary and century-old social and other prejudices, right? Independent thinker. Now, here, the courage to fight against the evils of the time. The Mujadid has to have courage, because he's going to fight against whatever the evils are. And this is where the scholars look at the type of scholarly Mujadid, and that is competency in ijtihad and the work of reconstruction. Ijtihad is the ability to make a religious decision. That takes a lot to be a mujtahid. You have to have a comprehensive knowledge of the deen and the ability to make the decisions in the particular time zone or environment that you're in, okay? And then, you see what he says? And the work of reconstruction, to reconstruct, okay? Now, there's some misconceptions about a Mujadid. And Sheikh Taqiyuddin Usmani, many of you may have heard him from Pakistan, this is from some of his writings. This is important. He said a Mujaddid is not a formal designation like a prophet and a messenger. A prophet is chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a messenger. Mujaddid is not a formal designation. Okay? It's only through his work that he is recognized as such. Okay? 2, a true Mujaddid does not claim to be a Mujaddid with certainty, nor does he invite others to believe in him as such. As I said before, if somebody comes to you and says, if somebody's saying he's the Mahdi, run the other way. Run from him, let me tell you. And Mujaddid, if somebody's claiming to be a Mujaddid, he's not a Mujaddid. 3, even if the majority of the Muslims is of the opinion a particular person is a Mujaddid, there is no religious obligation on others to believe in him as a Mujaddid. Okay? You benefit from the person. It's not an obligation. Okay, and this is a point in a place where he was coming from, India and Pakistan, where there's a lot of movements and groups, and they say, my sheikh is the best one, and my one is a Mujaddid, so you must follow him, or you're not in Islam, or something like this. He said no, because it's not a designation like this. Okay? 4, the Mujaddid does not receive any authentic revelation from Allah, like a prophet, nor does he make such a claim. Now, he may get ilham, it's possible. It's not wahi. Wahi is revelation. Ilham would be like a dream, right? But if you have a righteous dream, you can't say it's true until it happens, right? It's got to happen. 5, it's not necessary that a Mujaddid knows himself to be a Mujaddid, let alone laying any claim to this effect. Okay? And next, a Mujaddid is not infallible in his sayings and acts like a prophet. His sayings and acts normally conform to the Islamic teachings, but they are not treated like the sayings and actions of a prophet. This is very important. Because when it comes to the religion, the prophets have isma. The Prophet ﷺ, if it's authentic hadith, then we believe it is, he did not speak from himself, right? He is wahyun yuha, that Allah gave him this knowledge. Anybody else? Not treated like that. We benefit from the knowledge of this individual or this movement, but it is not treated in the same way. So these misconceptions are very important misconceptions. Of course, for those who are looking at tajdeed on the level of, ummah, the ummah and this individual who will rise up, this is a certain level, which we are actually in need of today, by the way. We could use somebody, who has this type of consciousness. Now, the concept of, remember the hadith, that this Mujaddid would come at the head of every 100 years, or a century, right? Now, one of the great scholars named Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, a great Tunisian scholar, he wrote a book. This is called the Muqaddimah. It's an introduction to the world history, the Muqaddimah. And this is a very important book in Islamic history. And in this Muqaddimah, he looked at society and he looked at change in society. Now, Ibn Khaldun is actually called and recognized even today as the father of sociology. Because sociology is the study of interactions of people. So he, as a historian, for the first time, didn't just look at history like string all these dates together. He looked at the relationship of people to each other and what comes out of it. And Ibn Khaldun has got a cyclical theory. He has a theory of a cycle. And he said the Muslim Ummah, and even all nations, sort of go through this cyclical change. He did this after studying Muslims, and he especially focused on Andalusia, on Spain and North Africa. He focused on this. And, but this is good for even other nations as well. And that is that the first generation that establishes a movement, say Islam is established in a certain area, they strive, they struggle, they give of themselves. Their children are with them. So the next generation coming up, that's maybe 20 years later or so, The next generation now, they're still striving and struggling, but they're not the original. They're it's a little softer because they sort of won the battle like. Okay, the next generation that comes, because the battle's won, they've consolidated themselves, and now they're in a palace. So the third generation is now living sort of a softer life, but because they're a third generation, they still can remember the founder. It's like 60 years later, or 80 years, they can remember the founder. But the fourth generation, unless there's a revival, unless there's tajdeed, then the fourth generation can literally turn around and go against what the original generation did.